I found my husband's secret lab results and realized he wasn't dying of cancer. He was lying about his terminal illness for 5 years. My life with David was a slow, heartbreaking slide into despair, all framed by the crushing, inevitable reality of his terminal diagnosis. For 5 years, our marriage wasn't about building a future, it was about managing his decline. David was diagnosed with an aggressive, rare form of pancreatic cancer shortly after our 10th wedding anniversary. He was 42. The news was shattering, and every decision we made from that day forward was dictated by his fragile health and limited time. I was Eleanor, the dutiful wife, the emotional caregiver, the woman who sacrificed everything to ensure his final years were comfortable. The sacrifice was immediate and total. I quit my demanding job as a marketing executive, a job I loved and excelled at, because David couldn't handle the stress of me being away, and he insisted he needed my full-time emotional support. We sold our dream house in the city and moved to a smaller, more affordable property near his family, a move he claimed was necessary for his end-of-life care team, though he was never actually close to his parents. I withdrew a significant portion of my retirement savings to cover what he called experimental alternative treatments that weren't covered by insurance. Every single action was justified by the clock ticking down on his life. David was meticulous about managing his illness. He handled all the communication with the doctors, insisted on going to appointments alone, and kept all his medical files locked away in a safe in his office. He would come home from his chemotherapy sessions looking appropriately gaunt and exhausted, and I would spend the evenings comforting him, bathing him, and listening to his quiet fear of leaving me and the children behind. His courage in facing death made him seem heroic, and my devotion to him made me feel noble. We were the tragic couple, defined by the beautiful, agonizing story of our impending loss. But over the last 6 months, small, insidious cracks began to appear in the narrative. David's aggressive cancer seemed remarkably stable. He complained about the pain, but he never seemed to decline in the rapid physical way the doctors had initially described. His hair, which he claimed was falling out from treatments, always looked slightly too full. When I suggested getting a second opinion at a major cancer center, he became furiously defensive, claiming I was disrespecting his chosen medical team and his limited energy. The final fatal flaw appeared when our home computer crashed. David, still the expert on all things tech, insisted I retrieve the files from his locked office safe, the safe that held his confidential medical records. He was panicking about losing his tax documents. He guided me over the phone to the safe, which I opened using the code he provided. Our wedding date, another cruel irony. Beneath the tax forms, I found the medical folder. It was thick, meticulously organized, and contained the full history of his illness. I pulled out the earliest documents, the ones detailing the initial diagnosis 5 years ago. I found the lab report marked Pathology Results, Dr. Simon. I scanned the findings, focusing on the diagnosis. It wasn't pancreatic cancer. It was a note from a rheumatologist confirming a severe but non-terminal autoimmune disorder. It was debilitating, painful, and required complex management, but it was absolutely not cancer. It was not terminal. My blood turned to ice. I flipped through the rest of the documents. There were years of prescriptions for pain management and immunosuppressants, all confirming the autoimmune disorder. There were no chemotherapy records. There were no oncologist notes. Instead, I found a folder marked Script, containing meticulously fabricated discharge papers, fake appointment schedules, and detailed notes on symptoms of pancreatic cancer, all designed to be shown to me, to validate the lie he was living. The fatigue he felt was real, caused by the autoimmune disorder, but the death sentence was a complete, calculated fabrication. I stared at the paperwork, the shock replaced by a sickening realization of the profound, comprehensive theft of my life. He hadn't just lied about being sick, he had deliberately staged a terminal illness to manipulate my career, my finances, and my emotional devotion. I had given up my career, liquidated my savings, and endured 5 years of heartbreaking grief, all for a man who was perfectly healthy enough to live another 30 years. The illness was real, but the dying was a devastating, elaborate, years-long fraud. I closed the safe quietly, replaced the documents, and locked it. I went to the window, watching the sunset over the quiet, suburban street he had forced us to move to. The profound, corrosive anger of 5 years of wasted life and devotion overwhelmed me. I realized I wasn't just married to a liar. I was married to a man who had feigned his own death to steal my future. The silence of the house that night was a heavy, unbearable cloak. I went through the motions of making dinner, the movements automatic, while my mind excessively processed the financial damage. The terminal diagnosis wasn't just an emotional lie, it was a devastating financial theft. I had liquidated my retirement savings, abandoned my high-paying career, and sacrificed years of professional earning potential, all under the premise of his impending death. The money for the experimental treatments, money I now knew was used for his lifestyle and control, was the hardest part to reconcile. When David came home, he performed his routine. He walked in slowly, leaning on the cane he used for effect, his face drawn in a mask of chronic pain and fatigue. He kissed me softly, thanked me for my devotion, and began his usual recitation of his tough day with the medical team. I let him finish the entire performance, watching his careful choreography of illness with a detached, clinical disgust. When he finished, I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked over to his briefcase, pulled out the fabricated pathology report, and placed it on the dining table next to the roast chicken. "Tell me about Dr. Simon's severe autoimmune disorder, David," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the room like a razor. "Tell me about the 5 years of pancreatic cancer I thought you had. And tell me where the money for the chemotherapy went." David's performance instantly dissolved. His eyes widened, his face losing all color, and the cane he was leaning on clattered to the floor, forgotten. He didn't try to lie, deny the documents, or even ask how I found them. The years of carrying the fraudulent death sentence finally broke him. He sank into a chair, the picture of defeated terror, and confessed everything. The story tumbling out in desperate, choked gasps. The root of the lie was not malice, but profound, self-serving fear. He admitted that 5 years ago, when he was genuinely diagnosed with the severe autoimmune disorder, he saw his life collapsing. He was afraid of getting old, afraid of losing his health, and most terrifyingly, he was afraid of losing me. He saw my demanding career, my constant travel, and my professional drive, and he became obsessed with the belief that my success would eventually lead me to leave him for someone healthier, someone more ambitious. "You were leaving me behind, Eleanor. You were soaring, and I was getting sick. I needed you to stop. I needed you to need me." He fabricated the terminal diagnosis, the pancreatic cancer, because he knew only a tragedy of that magnitude would force me to quit my career, liquidate my assets, and dedicate my life entirely to his care. The emotional caregiving, the financial sacrifice, the quiet shared tragedy, it was all designed to chain me to him, to make my devotion absolute and non-negotiable. He knew I would never abandon a dying man. The money I withdrew for the experimental treatments was used to purchase a lifestyle he couldn't afford. A private car, luxury goods, and extended leisure travel, all justified as final indulgences. He stole my future to save my present, he confessed, the statement chilling in its brutal simplicity. My anger finally erupted, not in screams, but in a cold, deep rage that made my whole body shake. "You didn't save your present, David. You stole my life. You stole 5 years of my prime career, you stole my retirement, and you stole the ability for our children to have a mother who wasn't perpetually mourning."
You didn't give me the gift of caring for you. You gave me the burden of living inside your selfish fantasy. I immediately contacted my lawyer. The complexity of the fraud was staggering, and my lawyer, accustomed to infidelity, was stunned by the sheer depth of the malicious intent. This was medical fraud, emotional abuse, and significant financial deceit. The legal path was clear: immediate divorce and a civil suit for loss of earning capacity and recovery of fraudulently obtained funds. My first external action was to inform my family and closest friends. The reaction was a protective, immediate fury on my behalf, but also a profound shared grief over the years we all spent mourning a man who wasn't dying. My sister, a nurse, was particularly enraged by the medical abuse. She accompanied me to retrieve all my personal belongings and documents. As I left the house, carrying the evidence of my stolen life, David stood in the doorway pleading. He still clung to the idea that his love and his need justified his crime. But I looked at him, no longer seeing a dying man, but a calculating manipulator who weaponized his own illness. "The sacrifice ends now, David," I told him, closing the door on the man who faked his death to steal my life. "The truth begins."
The divorce against David was not a separation. It was a comprehensive undoing of our shared life. He had built his entire financial argument on his victimhood. His terminal illness justified his control and his spending. My lawyer's strategy, however, was to expose the medical fraud. We presented the actual lab reports and the fabricated chemotherapy schedules. This wasn't infidelity. It was a profound case of financial and medical exploitation. The legal battle was primarily a civil suit seeking restitution for my lost earning capacity and the recovery of fraudulently obtained funds. David's lawyer tried desperately to frame his actions as the misguided coping mechanism of a man facing severe illness. But the sheer meticulousness of the fabrication, the fake discharge papers, the hidden funds used for luxury items, the years of sustained deception crushed that defense. The judge was appalled by the calculated cruelty, particularly the systematic destruction of my career and savings. The court ruled unequivocally in my favor. The marriage was dissolved on the grounds of medical and financial fraud. David was stripped of all joint assets in order to repay the significant portion of my retirement savings he had liquidated for his experimental treatments. More importantly, the ruling included a substantial settlement for the years of lost income and professional damage I sustained by quitting my executive career based on his deception. The verdict didn't just reclaim the money, it validated the truth of my stolen life. David was left with nothing but his real, non-terminal autoimmune disorder and the immense shame of his exposure. His social circle evaporated instantly, unable to reconcile the image of the heroic, dying husband with the reality of the fraudulent manipulator. The years immediately following the divorce were marked by the slow, painful process of rebuilding my confidence and my career. The money I recovered served as the foundation, but the true asset was the time I had regained. I enrolled in executive refresh courses and networking events, determined to reclaim the professional trajectory David had torpedoed. I found that the intense emotional rigor required to survive 5 years of medical fraud had, ironically, made me a far stronger, more resilient professional. I wasn't just qualified, I was formidable. I had to explain the absence of their father to my children carefully, telling them simply that Dad made some very serious mistakes that destroyed the trust in our partnership, and that honesty had to be the foundation of our family now. I focused relentlessly on creating stability, not financial affluence,
but emotional security built on unwavering truth. My sister, the nurse, helped me manage David's actual autoimmune condition from a safe distance, ensuring his physical health was maintained, but his access to our lives was cut off. My personal life remains quiet. I didn't rush into another relationship. The betrayal was too deep, the scar too profound. I am now working as a senior consultant, enjoying a career that is challenging, rewarding, and entirely mine. I look at my life now and realize the greatest cost of David's lie wasn't the money. It was the 5 years of genuine, compassionate grief I wasted on a healthy man. Yet, there is a strange, cold peace in the end. I learned that my love and my compassion were not the weaknesses David thought they were. They were my greatest strengths. I gave him 5 years of my life out of pure devotion, and when I discovered the truth, I used that same strength not to destroy him vindictively, but to systematically reclaim my reality. I am no longer the tragic wife mourning her husband. I am the resilient woman who was strong enough to face the terminal lie and build a vibrant, honest future on the ashes of his deceit. The cost was high, but the freedom I earned is priceless.